Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Big Home Ed Conversations. We have got a hard-hitting one for you today. My name is Kelly Rigg. I'm a home ed mum of two and a founder of Off-Roading Motherhood. I'm a qualified mindset coach, and I am really passionate about supporting parents and neurodivergent families especially as they navigate the transition from mainstream schooling into home education. I'm here together with my co-host, Ashley Venerio, a fellow home ed mum of three and former primary teacher. We've created the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast with what began as honest, heartfelt talks around typically her coffee table whilst the kids run around our ankles, and has now grown into a space where hundreds of listeners now tune in for real, unfiltered conversations about mindset, behaviour challenges, educational philosophies, and the often emotional journey of alternative education. So we cut through the noise and we focus on what really matters to home educating families, offering clarity, confidence, and some community in every episode. Today, we have just had the utmost pleasure of interviewing Catherine Gladwell from Refugee Education UK. She is the founder and CEO of an organisation that works to support families and children access education as they come to the UK. We reached out to them because one of the things which I was kind of really mulling over as I was talking to my kids about this kind of concept of changing perspectives, opening our minds, seeing other humans, was that actually people experience prejudice and hate and othering for a multitude of different reasons. But when you come to the UK as an asylum seeker or refugee, you are often experiencing so many barriers, language barriers, being able to translate your education to ours, being able to integrate with community, to uphold your own culture. And actually, I felt like when we consider the othering that we receive as home educating families, quite often we are also fearful of our children's ability to translate their learning into the wider world, that we worry too about them being able to access higher education and go on to be successful and to do all these amazing things, judging based on what they're capable of and them showing that they're just the most incredible people. And so whether you have travelled the world and been in different places, had to move country for various other reasons, we can all draw these threads of empathy. They are not the same and they are not the same experience, but there is an element of empathy there that we can all kind of draw from when we can maybe kind of factor in what some of these young people are going through, and the measuring stick that they're judged against, when truthfully they are absolutely incredible people, so driven, so appreciative of opportunities in education, and safety, and even some of the most basic things in life that they're now so grateful to be receiving that we take for granted. And I know that my children, as wonderful as they are, do on many occasions take things for granted, like I do, like we all do. And actually this interview has not only opened my mind and given me goosebumps half a dozen times, but has also made me realise that actually the more compassion we can draw in and be aware of more and more people in our world, the better, well-rounded people we can become, and the happier our children will be for it. The opportunities that they will receive in the world will be richer for it, that their gratitude will grow exponentially. So with no further ado, let's get stuck in. This has honestly been such a great talk, so I really hope you guys enjoy it. We are really excited to have you here today, Catherine. We were very, very honoured that you wanted to come on and chat to us about everything you're working on. So obviously today's conversation all around kind of the concept of refugee education might seem a little random to us in our home ed world. We tend to talk about home education and the various different challenges that we face, but actually I believe that it's something like half of all children who are current refugees are out of school right now, and obviously needing support with their education to obviously continue to allow them to actually go on to meet whatever potential they hold. Obviously, you must feel very passionate about it as you've obviously started Refugee Education UK, Catherine. We'd love to hear more about kind of what got you into caring so much about all of this and doing so much for the cause.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really, really wonderful to be here. And I think that you guys are some of the bravest and most brilliant mums for undertaking the challenges that you do every day. It's very inspiring. And you're right, it is just over half of the world's refugee children that are out of school. In the UK, we don't actually know exactly how many refugee children are out of school, because even at that sort of data collection level, these children are quite invisible, even in the data. But I used to be a teacher, and I had quite a lot of refugee children in my classes, and so saw firsthand, firstly, how important coming to school was for them. So I had children in my classes who were sort of aged 14 and 15, and who had been out of school for 3 or 4 years, or who had never had the chance to go to school before because of the environment, the conflict, and the lack of education where they had grown up, then kind of long and complicated journeys to the UK, and then long waits for education when they arrived here. And so when they finally found themselves in the classroom, the value that they placed on that was immense. At the same time, I also saw firsthand some of the challenges that they were encountering that were affecting their ability to actually kind of make the progress in education that they wanted to make. Cut a long story short, probably several years later, after working for an international NGO in education and emergencies and sort of more humanitarian response type of work in other countries, I was walking down my street in London, and had noticed that there's this group of kids that was always sitting on the wall at the end of my road, and got chatting to them, and they turned out to be refugee teenagers who were living in a house that belonged to the local authority on my road. There were 5 of them in the house with no adult, so 16-year-olds all together in one house, visited by a social worker each day. And they weren't in school. And so I was still working in education at that point, and got chatting to them. After you walk past the same kids day after day, if you're a teacher, I also used to be a youth worker, you get chatting. And I asked them, why are you not in school? And they said, we want to be learning, but we're still waiting. And from that, it transpired that in the area where I lived, there were issues around refugee children getting places in schools, particularly older teenagers. And so I got together. At that time, it was just me, a few volunteers. So I'm part of a very small, informal local church in my neighbourhood, and a few of us got together and were like, we could run a volunteer educational mentoring program, maybe just for 10 kids. So we got in touch with the local authority and with a local further education college, and we started working with 10 unaccompanied refugee children who were waiting for school places, or who had just about got a place in college but were really struggling to kind of keep up with what was being taught because of the gaps in their previous education. So that's how we started. And honestly, I thought, we've stumbled across a local need, but surely there must be some charity out there somewhere whose remit it is to, engage with education for refugee children in this country, because it's such a clear need. And I guess our story of the last decade has been gradually discovering that what was a local need is actually a national need. And I wouldn't say growing to meet that gap, because, no one can do that on their own, but our contribution into that space growing and becoming a more national charity, and trying to help refugee children get into education as quickly as possible, and then thrive academically and in terms of their mental health once they're there.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading some of the stories on your website shortly before we got on this call today, and it's so empowering hearing how committed they all are to their own future and what they want to achieve. I think there's one young lad who wants to become a mechanical engineer, and he was saying that he kind of fought tooth and nail to kind of get in. It was like 3 months before GCSEs were due to be sat, and he was able to sit them, and I think got a 7. And he was just like, that he obviously had worked so hard to like really self-driven, really self-motivated, and obviously clearly very talented mathematical brain as well. And it's one of the things that we often talk about and sort of champion within the home education kind of world, that we talk about, is how self-driven young people can be when they have got a goal and they have got an intention. Obviously, these are young people who have experienced the most insane trauma that we can't even possibly begin to comprehend, and have fought tooth and nail to come to a country where they are hoping to receive support and welcoming and hopefully an opportunity for education that will allow them to go on to do great things with their lives. And they must face such a lot of barriers. But it's a real, it's almost like a testament to how self-driven they actually are, to have even reached the point of coming and asking for it, especially if they're unaccompanied. Like, I can't even imagine that journey. But do you find that a lot of the young people that you work with have got this kind of real ability to go, this is what I want and this is what I'm trying to do, and they really want to take it with both hands and have that real commitment to themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I love how you've just articulated that, and I think it is that they have developed so much resilience and seen the value of what education can do, and so they've become very kind of clear-sighted about what they hope to achieve. But not only for themselves, but one of the things that has most struck me over the years is just how much the young people and the children that we work with have got, their motivation is for others as well. It's like, yeah, I want to be a mechanical engineer, but it's because one day I'd really love to be able to go back and help rebuild in my country. Or I was talking to a girl about 3 or 4 days ago who was saying, I'm just desperate to get a place on a midwifery course, because I've seen what it's like when women have to give birth in contexts where there is, completely inadequate medical care, and I want to be part of the change in that. And 100 different stories like that. So yes, really resilient and determined and ambitious for their own lives, but so often because they want to do something to support a broader community, whether it's in their country of origin and they're hoping for a more peaceful future there and being able to contribute, or it's saying I'd like to be able to contribute here in this community that I'm now part of. And I think that's also something that gets hugely overlooked in a lot of the ways that people talk about young refugees, particularly at the moment.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we really wanted to draw attention to. And obviously the concept of this series of changing perspectives is that I appreciate that there is an awful lot of hate and prejudice and frustration being shown towards refugees in the UK right now. And I'm also very conscious that we as home educators also, like, obviously nowhere near the same scale, but we do receive a level of prejudice and stereotyping. And like every minority group does, people believe that individuals are not capable of great things sometimes when they're not kind of necessarily conforming to what everybody is expecting them to be. And I think one of the things we were discussing, the various barriers that they must face when sort of trying to access education, sort of language, and trying to overcome that barrier. And as you say, trying to comprehend the content they're being given when they're then also trying to translate it all the time. And I think one of the things that I know that must happen a lot is this kind of conflict with sort of prejudice, especially when obviously coming from places, from war-torn places, people are worried and they obviously get anxious about this. And so I can appreciate that they must be dealing with such a lot of prejudice in their interactions with people as well. And that is such a barrier to be overcoming when you're trying to obviously do such great things. I mean, to want to go back to your home country to help women give birth because they've seen such awful things happening, to be sort of judging them or not giving them opportunities or not helping them to achieve those things seems diabolical to me, because they are genuinely just trying to exist like we all are.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, like we all are. And I think that sense of shared humanity and our tendency as people to just sort of see a statistic or see something like you're saying with home education that is like other to my normality and my identity and what I've chosen to do, and not see the shared humanity underneath that. And that, what parent isn't trying to do the best for their child? What young person isn't trying to build a future for themselves and their family and their community, whatever that looks like? We see a kind of cumulative set of barriers that grow for these young people. So you're right, everything that's come before the point that they've arrived in the UK, but then language, as well as language, trying to catch up on gaps in education. So trying to sort of get accelerated content there whilst having a language difficulty, whilst potentially experiencing, serious trauma. I think it's estimated that about 90% of refugee children are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Obviously, the majority of them have also experienced levels of intense grief. Some of them have experienced torture or violence. Almost all of them have been separated from family members in some way, shape or form. And so there are layers to it. And then you're also trying to navigate a system that you are completely unfamiliar with. And I, as a parent myself, sometimes I find the UK education system a challenge to navigate, even just like I mean, maybe you have a better way in the home education system, I don't know. But even like, there's the parents' WhatsApp groups and the school platform for telling you about your child's behaviour that day and communicating about trips and resources and what they need to bring in on this day and that day, and then the platform for booking after school clubs or for paying for a school trip, and everything's got its own different password, and you kind of feel lost before you started. So there's a kind of practical barrier as well for parents, even not even just the children who are also dealing with all of their own challenges, to then try and engage with this system that is complicated. The level of support available varies, and obviously I want to be very clear that there are so many schools and teachers that go above and beyond out of their way to include and make that journey easier, but it's different. It's not the same across the board, and I think the older refugee children are when they arrive, the more these difficulties sort of compound, because you deal with all of that, but then you deal with, let's take GCSEs that you also just mentioned. You deal with school reluctance to admit students in that year before GCSEs because they're worried that it's going to affect their, GCSE results profiles, because they're taking in a 15-year-old who's got a language barrier and content gaps and, not going to get great GCSE results potentially. As it turns out, there is actually a provision in sort of DfE guidance that means that those children don't have to be included in GCSE results. So, but the number of schools that are aware of that provision is quite limited, and so we see this kind of unnecessary exclusion when they're like being like held back from being admitted in that GCSE year because of that fear that we're told all the time about by educators. Oh yeah, I heard that they're not going to get a place because they don't want their results profiles to be affected, and it's completely unnecessary. It doesn't have to be the case, but you see all of these things kind of combine, and then you get to the further education level where eligibility becomes extremely complex, and then the higher education level when the barriers become even more sort of impermeable in terms of fee status and access to finance and things like that. So we do see that sort of thread of children as they arrive, as they progress through the system. It doesn't always get easier. It can become harder and harder.
What about kind of the way they can translate learning? So obviously they appreciate that maybe would have gaps if you took our education system into account in terms of the expectations of them meeting sort of SAT levels and then GCSE levels, etc., etc. But in terms of translating experience and learning, so if they have come from a situation that, yes, okay, they maybe they were home learning their entire life, or they have had that kind of background, but their parents have been, I don't know, say for example, they were doctors or they were people who have got a good education themselves and they have educated their children, but they've obviously come to the UK to seek asylum and have now been trying to access a school system, etc. How easy is it sometimes for them to translate the learning that they've already got or their understanding? So obviously, I suppose even just the language barrier could prevent an awful lot of that. Like if they, for example, have learned everything in Arabic, for example, then they may struggle then to be able to translate that to English directly and immediately. But actually intelligence level wise and actual understanding of that subject wise, they actually have done really well. Do you find that translation is difficult a lot of the time as well for them to actually be able to prove that they have got abilities in these subjects and they do understand science really well or they do understand maths really well? But obviously I think in one of them I was reading that it's just understanding, doing the GCSE was more about understanding how Edexcel form their papers than it was about actually learning mathematical concepts. And I mean, this is an argument we have a lot in the UK about our education system and the fact that young people are basically just being prepared to pass an exam, not actually kind of necessarily having them become passionate about the subject. And I think that there's an awful lot of innate learning that young people are doing, and especially when they're that driven, and especially if they've come from difficult scenarios, that they themselves may have been seeking education all their lives and have a lot of intelligence in these areas, but aren't necessarily able to translate it in a way that we're going to accept, which obviously limits their potential. and surely there could be other ways of helping them to demonstrate it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see all the time is that language ability is like correlated sort of erroneously with intelligence or academic ability across the board. And so that exact example that you just mentioned, that, a child has got language challenges, and so it's like, well, they're going to be in the, bottom set for everything, or whatever, even though they are actually a mathematical genius, it turns out.
Yeah.
I think the number of young people that we have seen that we've been able to support kind of like through the system, that have actually gone on to get scholarships at high level universities and graduated sort of top of their class, and that in itself is testament to the fact that it's not the case when you judge a child at the level that they might present as being because of a combination of language and trauma on arrival, is absolutely not indicative of the academic ability and potential, so existing academic ability and potential that they have. And I think we've probably seen two things that have really helped in that space of overcoming and not getting stuck in that, like, oh, they seem to be struggling in the classroom and they can't really speak very good English yet, so therefore. And the first of those would be when schools and other educators have sort of proactively looked for opportunities to see what is it that this child already has and how can we kind of platform that. So, for example, you mentioned maybe they've learned everything in Arabic. Well, can they do an Arabic GCSE? Or then we've worked with an amazing school who's introduced a whole cluster of mother tongue GCSEs, and it's kind of recognizing, well, that's just going to boost their UCAS points ultimately, or whatever it is, or it's going to mean that they've got that GCSE that they need to go into FE college to do that course that they want to do. And so looking at in the spectrum of the skills and the experiences that the child is bringing to the table, even if they have got some language barriers, even if they have missed out on 2 years of education or whatever, what can we put in place that will give them credit for what they are already bringing? Yeah. And the second thing, actually it's 3 things. So the second thing would be when schools try to incorporate elements of accelerated learning into their curriculum. And I'm guessing I am not any kind of home education expert, so I'm making like assumptions and guessing, but I'm guessing you would know a lot about adapting curriculums and accelerating learning for children who need it, and like giving more focus on pausing on a particular at other times. So that's something that's of critical importance for refugee children who've missed out on things. So we one of the things that we are sort of advocating for is for schools to have more resources and to be better equipped to be able to do more accelerated learning where kids need to be able to hit certain milestones and actually can do it. And it doesn't need to take, 5 years. It can happen but only with like a certain amount of acceleration at key points. And there's really great learning sort of internationally about how that can happen, and places that have much greater numbers of refugee children in their education systems or in informal systems than we do in the UK that have got brilliant accelerated learning and catch-up models. And the final thing would be when we acknowledge that children have got specific talents in specific areas and giftings in specific subject areas, and schools are able to provide like bespoke language support in those areas. So I was talking to a school recently who's developed just on the side, they had like a few young people who were clearly really good at science, but were just struggling with like the technical English science related vocabulary. And so they've just like developed a kind of, oh, great, here's how you can thrive in science, focus to the language support that those children are getting, so that it's not just like, oh, let's start with a generic English language support that isn't probably going to get to actual science vocabulary for ages, but let's see like, where do you have academic ability, but the English language component of that is holding you back, and let's target the language support in those areas so that you can actually access the curriculum, and you can make the progress that actually you can do, because you were top of your class in science in Ukraine or in Iran or in whatever it was.
Yeah, it must be really demoralizing sometimes for them, though, I imagine, especially when they are obviously very gifted and so self-driven, and obviously have had a gap in education that was obviously through no fault of their own, and they're obviously probably going to have continued to do their best in whatever situation they're in to maintain curiosity and the world experiences that we can gain. I mean, a lot of people really see the benefit of, like, even just the concept of being in one country and then being in another provides a massive learning opportunity and stretches our brain. It gives us a lot of logic problems to solve, and it gives us a lot of, I say, vocabulary to learn, and like different situations and cultures to absorb. And I mean, we value, and I say it's not the same, but like the concept of travel and experiencing different cultures, actually we see as an enriching thing. That's something that we see as being really beneficial to our education and learning. But I do feel like the stigma that comes with refugees obviously coming to a country because they've needed to and actually need support because obviously their country is in such turmoil, that we see that as a downside almost, for them, that they're not obviously getting to. Yeah, I don't really understand. It doesn't make any sense when you kind of look at it from that perspective. That actually the enrichment and the intelligence that it offers us and the concepts that we're able to grasp under duress and in these different situations and having to problem solve and deal with all of these things, that actually it demonstrates a really high level of resilience and capability. Yeah, really strong character. And yeah, I think it's really fascinating, isn't it? So I think coming from like the concept of what the point of this series was, for sure, was to kind of get parents to think about these things in a sense of it's important to talk to our children about them, because where one of the things that home education maybe may fall down is the fact that obviously if a child is going into a classroom, they are going to be surrounded by 30 odd children in that group who potentially have come from a lot of different walks of life. The home education community, through no fault of its own, does become quite niche. And it's not that there aren't any people who are refugees possibly in our home education community, or there are people who are from all over different, like we've got so many friends from lots of different countries who speak different languages around our children, and they eat different foods around our children. And so they do experience it. And we can absolutely be very conscious of offering these opportunities to them. But actually, I hadn't thought until very recently to pick up the conversation about refugees with my children and to explain in any kind of great capacity what they may have been through or what they're experiencing when they come here and how incredible they are, and the innovations that we get from the wisdom that we share with strangers when we get to meet new people, the things we can learn, like, because once you get a different perspective, so someone who has experienced, like for example, that person who wants to become a midwife and go back and support women who are struggling to access good healthcare in that moment, that experience leads to innovation. That leads to that person thinking, well, one person can only do so much. What else could I do? Could I collaborate with this person? Could I get this charity involved? Could I create this? Could I create this tool or this kit or this, like, whatever? And these are the people who drive innovation that allows massive change to happen in the world, because it's those who experience things who offer the most perspective. And the more we offer our children the chance to talk to people or learn from people or see their perspectives, the more opportunity there is for collaboration. Obviously, you yourself have experienced supporting refugees and have now gone on to do all the incredible things you've done, but you wouldn't have necessarily done any of that unless you'd experienced what you'd experienced and seen what you'd seen. And so, well, I obviously am very conscious of not letting my children grow up in a bubble. I don't want them to only know the home ec community, only know our experience of life and what our life looks like. I want them to see that there's lots of different lived experiences, because it's through that collaboration and talking to those people that we obviously build our future lives. So obviously one of the books that we're going to recommend people read off the back of this episode is The Boy at the Back of the Class, which is about a refugee boy who's come to the UK and is joining a UK school. So that's a really nice, relevant choice for this. We'll obviously link that in the details for this episode. But how else can people bridge this conversation with their kids? What else could we be talking to them about, like, without obviously appreciating age level and like their ability to understand these concepts and things, and obviously being conscious of triggering them with some quite not so pleasant thoughts as well, so being careful with it as you feel needed to for your child's age. What should we be talking to them about? What should we be showing them?
It's a really beautiful question. There's a beautiful video actually that I have shown in a lot of school assemblies that I should have recorded the name of before we started talking, but I'll send it to you. It's made by Save the Children, And it's just kind of 4-minute cartoon exploration of what it might feel like to be a new refugee child in an education environment, and the difference that a friend can make in that. My daughter, when she was, I first showed it to her when she was 7, and thinking, oh, I wonder how she'll find it. She was like, "Can I watch it again, Mummy? Can I watch it again? Can I watch it again?" And she wanted to watch it like 5 times on retreat, and I've used it in a lot of school assemblies ever since. So I will share that with you. I think that could be a really lovely resource. But otherwise, I mean, the book that you've just mentioned is it's hard to think of anything better that's out there. There are some really lovely Osborne resources, like sort of Lift the Flap, or Refugees, books that really go into sort of some of the misconceptions around terminology and look at like what might happen on a journey to the UK, what might happen when you get here, what might have happened in someone's country of origin, but in a way that isn't too triggering or it's age appropriate. There's an author called Gulwali Pasaleh, who I would really recommend for older kids, say for like teenagers, who was he's an amazing Afghan refugee advocate, incredible young guy, who wrote about his story, and again, I'd recommend that. There's another book called No Ballet Shoes in Syria, which is quite good for young teenagers, and particularly, it's aimed at girls, like primarily, and sort of trying to help kids realize, like, oh yeah, like maybe it's the going to ballet that you miss. And like that there's normal children who are enjoying going to ballet and enjoying going swimming and going to their auntie's house for lunch on Saturday, and it's all been kind of torn apart. And so I think resources like that emphasize that sort of child to child connection, and see you as like, oh, this is just a kid like me, whose life got disrupted and now they're trying to build it back together. It has been really, really helpful, and that anything that just builds empathy on a person to person level, I think is really, really useful. There is an organisation called Schools of Sanctuary that has quite a lot of resources for like teaching about refugees, which are quite useful. So their website is quite a helpful resource, and I know they're doing some like updates and stuff to that at the moment. So I'd also recommend looking at that.
That's really great. We'll make sure we obviously link all of those in the resources attached to this episode. That's really fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I can really relate to that, because obviously this is nowhere near the same experience at all. But I lived for about 8 or 9 years in Italy, and when I went there, I did not have the language. And just the treatment you get, the assumptions that are made right off the bat, that because you can't speak the language, you are not smart at all. You've clearly never worked a day in your life. You are just unable to participate. It is very humbling and very frustrating. And it's very hard to want to speak and not be able to get the words out that you want to say. And you say it the way a 3-year-old would say it, not the way a grown-up would say it. And the difference that having a friend to come to you, another mom at the preschool pickup, to come and say like, oh, I speak English. Like, do you want to go get a cup of coffee? And then being able to have a conversation with them that you're on that same level is just so incredibly important for mental health, for you to feel like you've filled your cup a little bit, like you are of value. And I think it's kind of nice to see the growth that can come from that. But I'm always reminding them, we can't judge people based on what we see. We have no idea of their experience or what they've been through. We need to be supportive. We need to give the benefit of the doubt. We need to offer our friendship and support. And we do this, like Kelly was saying, as much as we can within our home ed community, but it is European based. So we get just only a slight sliver of the differences that the world has to offer. So we just want to make sure that we're intentionally looking for what's missing and looking at ways to bring that to our children so they can experience it and kind of add that to their portfolio, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And I mean, do you find yourself ever working with families, Catherine, who, like, I know obviously most families, I imagine, coming to the UK as asylum seekers, etc., obviously the use of a school to help provide education so that gives the parents an opportunity to work or to start earning some money so they can get their feet on the ground and actually start to build a life for themselves, etc. I appreciate that home education is probably not actually something which comes up as an elective choice. I mean, I'm making assumptions there myself that they may find that that's not something which they necessarily want to fall into particularly. But do you find some people want to continue their own education individually, that they don't want to utilise schools, that they want to be able to learn with their children at home? Do you find much of that at all in the work you do?
It's a really interesting question. The kind of very short answer is like, no, we don't find very much of it. And, for all of the reasons that you've mentioned. And I think there is something, particularly for children who have come from a school environment in their country of origin, there's something very sort of normalizing and stabilizing about when you do get into school, being back in a routine, in a place. It's new, but it's school. It's got like a program, and you're making friends, and their English language, spoken language. Once a child is in school, it just starts to shoot up, and we do find that parents are juggling so many responsibilities and challenges of their own, and then other parents who would be perfectly able to access the curriculum and support their children in it, and other parents whose own educational backgrounds or access to education that they had as a child, it would mean that they would struggle to access the UK curriculum. There was, within the Ukrainian community, we did work with a significant number of families who, for a long time, were trying to exist in two systems at once, and which, again, is completely understandable because, and this is a kind of an issue across the board in refugee education globally. When you're displaced, what do you do? Do you start to follow the curriculum of the country that you are now in, or do you try and maintain the curriculum of the country that you have been forced to leave, in the hope that it's all going to be okay in 6 months' time and we'll be back and that will be the exams our kids will be doing? And of course, like, the challenges that nobody knows, like the average length of displacement, unfortunately, like these days, is 17 years globally, like regardless of the conflict. So but yeah, of course, your hope is like, I want to go home. I want my kids to be back in their own education system. I want them to do, and I'm sure if I was displaced, I would be thinking like, oh, but she's got GCSEs in 2 years' time. I need to keep her on track for that, rather than like, oh, can she start, learning Arabic tomorrow, which she doesn't speak at all, for example. That of course also. And so we did see that, particularly with like Ukrainian children who were doing like significant numbers of hours of online learning, like often with their old schoolmates from their classes in Ukraine online.
Wow.
But also trying to study at a school in the UK, and it's exhausting.
That sounds really tough. And I guess that also kind of brings us on to the concept of like lost culture as well. Like, it must, for parents, obviously, to be trying to help their children to maintain that sense of identity and to be proud of it and to keep that, like, their language and their lived experience and like the knowledge of their home alive, whilst also trying to assimilate within a community. It must be so difficult. And like, I think this is where kind of almost every family in the world does some form of home learning with their children, whether it's around school, it's on the weekends, it's cultural, it's your faith, it's whatever it is that you do, right? Like, everyone is teaching their children their own values and their own things at home. And I guess I love the fact that obviously they are trying to obviously help them to get Arabic GCSEs and to offer them a chance to allow their skills that they do have that would have counted for something, they would have 100% counted for something at home, and now they're here, and it still needs to count for something. It's not fair that it doesn't. That those children potentially have worked so hard to get to the level they are in whatever subjects that they were prioritizing at home, and to be able to translate that is so important. But also to really value this, like the culture and the identity 100%. Of these individuals, that I do feel like often, again, a lot of the hate language around it is very much about assimilation and people kind of conforming to being part of the British culture. And to, like, within the realms of sensibility, I think it's a real shame when people have that attitude, because ultimately I just think that I don't really see why that matters at all. Like, mostly I want people to be themselves. There is so much value. And I want to see people being themselves and learn from them about their lived experiences and the foods they eat and the language they speak. I mean, a friend of mine speaks Czech, and it's such a beautiful language to listen to. And it's a really funny story. It was a camping trip we did a couple of years ago where we went with someone who spoke Czech with her children, a lady who speaks Swiss German with her children, and a lady who speaks Italian with her children. And so out of a group of 5 or 6 people, there's like 3 British families speaking English, and the rest of them were speaking English to us, but then Czech to their kids or whatever. And by the end of the week, my youngest, who was 4 at the time, had created her own language and was starting to talk to me in gobbledygook, and expecting me to understand it. And I didn't twig for a few days that what she had done was start to think that, hang on a minute, all these children have got a secret language with their parents. Why don't we have one? And it honestly took months for her to stop doing it, where she was just making up words and saying, that means that, mummy. And I was just like, okay. But she kept changing it all the time. It was so funny. But like that ability for her to recognise that there were other languages going on around her and how beautiful that is. And she was curious about it and open and interested in it. And I want to see us behaving that way that much more. And like, we very briefly, myself and Ashley were talking before we got on about kind of adults coming over as well, who are doctors or who have like worked so hard. They've got such incredible qualifications, and it doesn't translate. And I think this is obviously, you must be so passionate about all of this.
Yeah, completely. And I honestly, I feel like sometimes I can't believe that I get to do the job that I do, because I have, over the last 15 years, the number of just incredible young people. I mean, I can't even begin to summarize what I have learned and how much my worldview and life has been enriched by the young people that I've had the privilege of spending time with and meeting and learning like bits about how they see the world and what's important to them. And it also reminds me of one of my favorite things that a head teacher has ever said to me. And this is the head teacher of a large inner city comprehensive in London, that's sort of boys only until sixth form and then mixed. And it's in an area of high deprivation. And it has a large community of refugee students in the school. And he said to me, enrolling refugee students into this school is the single best thing I have done in terms of improving the behaviour, increasing the empathy, and boosting the academic motivation of the students of this school across the board, because we've had this group of kids come into the school who understand what it is to not have education and who aren't taking it for granted, who are, sort of looping back to what you were saying right at the start, Kelly, really driven and want to grab the opportunity that they've got in front of them with both hands, for themselves and for the people around them. And who are bringing this rich diversity and culture of different foods and just a different way of thinking about life, but from a place of shared humanity and being friends with each other. And I just thought that was brilliant from an inner city London head teacher. It was what more could you want than that?
Yeah, that's such a powerful statement, isn't it? It reminds me, Kelly, of the comment we heard. We were speaking to a gentleman in America a couple of weeks ago, and his comment was, the greatest way to reduce or get rid of racism is to travel with your kids. And if you can't do that, it's we should be taking advantage of these opportunities for these other cultures to come to ours so we can see them, we can experience them, we can appreciate the differences and realize how much they add to humanity, to all of us. And I think that, wow, I love that he said that, and that he's seeing the beauty of that.
I honestly can't think of a better way to round up that episode, to be honest. It feels like a really good note to end on. It's such an important thing to remember, and I hope that all of us can take a leaf out of that book in terms of making sure that we take the time to say hello to people, and that we encourage our children to be open and accepting of all people, and to take the time and to be patient, and to allow someone the time to fall over their words for a minute and try and get out what they want to say, and to remember that that person is an equal, and they are human just like we are human. And I think that for the most part we are that way in the home education community. I want to be generalist, but I do feel like we do care an awful lot about every individual, and so it's as a shout out, I guess, to anybody who may be in a situation where you want to be home educating, where you want to be part of the community. Know that you are very welcome as well, and that we want to hear your journey. So yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Honestly, this has been such a moving conversation. I've found myself get goosebumps a few times, and I really hope that people have taken a lot from this as well. But we'll certainly let you know what feedback we get. But thank you so much.
So much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you, and listening to both of you as well this morning. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. You've been listening to the Big Home Ed Conversations podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Big Home Ed Podcast for updates. We'll be back again next week for another episode, but don't forget to send us your questions, comments, and personal experiences on the topics we'll be covering this season. Visit our blog, linked in the show notes, for a reminder of the topics, or just message us directly on Instagram and TikTok. Take care.